Hello and welcome. I'm Lisa M. Harrison and you're listening to Deconstructing the Construct. It has been and continues to be my mission to support and empower individuals during this global awakening, to help them remember who they are, where they are, and how to navigate their way home. Much of what I'll be sharing in this series has been spoken before, sprinkled across podcasts, interviews, and YouTube updates that I've done since 2009. They've all been shared in real time as the information emerged. But the full story has never been told in one continuous format, until now. Even for those who have followed along for years, there is new understanding and information. It feels not just important but necessary to bring it all together at this time, because as you'll come to understand, this journey is ultimately about keeping our minds and souls intact. As much as this is playing out on a global circus stage, it is very much an individual inside job. We are now at a moment where we must remember, together, as we collectively deconstruct this construct, the strength and clarity of each individual heart becomes vital. This will be a raw, unscripted, and honest account of my path of discovery. I don't know how many episodes there'll be or how long each one will run, but I do know that this is a journey, and I hope you'll walk it with me. Welcome to episode 1, Deconstructing Me. From childhood knowings to collapsing timelines, public interviews to private, otherworldly contact, this is the story behind the story. How my life has uniquely prepared me for this now. Deconstruction of my journey, shared in hindsight, and perhaps as you listen, you'll find fragments of your own journey mirrored right back to you. So why am I doing this right now? I feel an urge, a pull, a sense of urgency to get as many people as I possibly can prepared for what is about to play out. Why remembering who and what and where we are is now quite critical. Over the years, I have broadcasted in the forms of interviews, weekly YouTubes, different programs and shows, Collective Imagination, the One People Show, an original Deconstructing the Construct, and currently energetic updates, YouTube lives, and everything has just been sprinkled, dropped since 2009. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with me, I became public in 2009, conducting interviews with a focus on the 2012 date, the Mayan calendar. It quickly expanded into all manner of spiritual consciousness, conspiracy topics. Some of you may know me because in 2016, I had an unusual form of contact with a being I came to call Lilu. And we will get into that in some detail in the next episode. But now I want to go back and just talk about our lives and what events have brought us to this moment. We all have direct lived experience that has told us things are not as they seem. I remember being a very small child, 2 and 3 years old. And the way I've always described it over the years is that feeling that I got off the bus at the wrong stop. This was all wrong. This world was all wrong. The way people spoke to each other and treated each other was all wrong. And I had a tendency to tell the adults that around me too. I was intuitive as a child. I had a tendency to really know what people were feeling, regardless of what they were saying. And I know many of you will relate to that. But I think it's quite clear to most of us that we are in the midst of a grand awakening. And I'm going to break that down a little bit. We can go back to the hippie movement of the 60s. Let's go back that far. And from my knowing, that was the first input, the first flush, the first wash of what I call heart frequency in order to reawaken the souls, the minds, and the hearts. But it was so quickly co-opted into a free love movement. And free love and unconditional love are not the same thing. People's organic, energetic consciousness experiences were quickly co-opted by psychedelics. As a result, it ultimately fizzled. The next big moment that I'm aware of would have been the harmonic convergence in 1987. A lot of people woke up at that point. And it really, to me, birthed the explosion of what we would now call the New Age movement. People connecting with ETs and channeling and all of that sort of stuff really started to take off after that. But again, that's another co-opted movement. There's some truth in there, but there's also a lot of distortion, a lot of dead ends, a lot of disempowerment. And then in the 90s, I personally discovered the Mayan calendar and their end of time for 2012. And at the time, it felt like a very long way away. But in 2009, I went through, I guess what you would call a dark night of the soul. I was very happy with my life, which is the strange part. I was quite fulfilled. I was a mother of 3 young children, and I loved my life. I loved my kids. But there was a hole. There was a big gaping hole somewhere in my chest that nothing seemed to be able to fill. And when you've been talking to people, as many people as I have since 2009, you realize that that was a pretty popular year for the next wave of awakening. And I ended up on my knees in my bedroom, just show me what I need to do. And without even realizing the two things were connected, I found myself doing interviews with people who had information around 2012. And it was the easiest thing I'd ever done. The response from people was, I just got yeses. Everywhere I asked, people said yes. Even to this unknown Aussie chick who no one had heard of. The next step in my process, next big one, would have been in 2011. I had an experience, I guess, more than a lucid dream, about the moon, which I had never given any thought to before. I had never questioned what it was, how it was, what it did. It was just the moon. But in this experience, I was standing back looking at the earth and the moon. And I saw a net, like a huge fishing net that gets cast out. And it was cast out from the moon, encapsulating the earth. And I knew it was, if you've had these experiences, you know what I mean by this. You just know that it was a grid. It was a two-way grid system, information system. It was reading the information from the collective consciousness. And that information was being fed back to a base, like a physical base on the moon. And analysing that and then sending out a counter program through that grid system into the consciousness, so that we were being literally programmed. But it was bigger than that. I also saw, now I don't believe these things were literal. I think a lot of the visuals that we have are often metaphoric, just so that we can understand them, and they're usually personal to us. But I saw what looked like a physical recycling centre, like a factory. And I knew it was the rinse and repeat centre. In other words, the reincarnation spot. And then I saw lights going on all over the world. And I knew it was love. I knew it was people's hearts. And this is long before, this is 2011, so this is long before I had any real concept that came much later of heart frequency and of what that means. But I knew that's what this was. I knew it was hearts and love, and they just lit up. And that grid, that fishing net, that information, that frequency fed up into that net, it went straight back to the facilities and it blew them up. Big explosion. And that there was no more reincarnation, that it was done. Not forced, not tricked, that kind of reincarnation. That people were now free to choose whether or not to come back. Now I looked for evidence. What would that even look like? How can you find evidence of such a thing? But with energetic experiences and visualizations or images like that, you don't really get concrete 3D. But what I did begin to notice was orbs. Every time somebody took a photo, there were orbs everywhere. And if you had a group photo, there could be tens, if not hundreds of these orbs in a single photo, that it became such a thing. And as I'll get to in more detail later, in 2016, they started to dissipate dramatically. And my understanding is that even though that rinse and repeat cycle, that reincarnation loop was now done, as people were leaving, passing away, they were not able to leave the construct as a whole. So they were still kind of stuck here until 2016 when the doors opened, which we'll go into later. The next significant thing in my journey would have been early 2012. I did an interview with a guy called Bill Wood on Project Looking Glass. Now, he'd had just completed 3 interviews with Kerry Cassidy. That was his big debut. And I was the first person he spoke to after that. And that was my introduction to timelines. The fact that there is technology that can read timelines, that can predict timelines. So I hope you can see and follow with me that each of these experiences, each of these little pieces of information built upon one another. And this leads me straight into the next experience, which was on Christmas Day of 2013. I just have to give a little bit of a backstory and context for this experience, though. When I was 9 years old, I had a grand mal seizure. Completely out of the blue. No precursors, no nothing. 9 months later, I had another one, and 9 months later, I had another one. Now, I have come to understand what that really was for me. These were experiences of more of me coming in. You've heard of the term walk-ins, I'm sure. These were instances of more of me walking in over an 18-month period. And the sensation of a seizure, the sensation of a grand mal, which you only get for like a fraction of a second before you're in it, has never left me. So the next big significant event was Christmas Day, 2013. I was in America at the time, and I woke up about 8 a.m. I was fine for the first 2 hours. And then about 10 a.m. I started to feel that very undeniable sensation that I referred to earlier that accompanies a seizure. But I was just sitting in it. It wouldn't go anywhere. It didn't progress into a seizure. It didn't back off. I just was sitting in this prolonged sensation. And I really thought I was on the brink of a grand mal seizure for like 2 hours. It was exhausting. At about midday, I went and laid down. And I was in an RV with no heating in Pennsylvania, in the backyard, in 3 feet of snow. It was absolutely freezing. But I was overheating. I was waking up knowing that I was delirious and sweating and having visuals and all kinds of things, and I was in a delirium. And then somebody came to check on me, woke me up after about 2 hours, but I don't remember that. And in fact, I don't remember anything really until about 11 o'clock that night. I spent all of that time walking around in and out of the house, up and down the street. Somebody had to accompany me everywhere because I didn't know what I was doing. My consciousness was not present. All I kept saying was the timelines are collapsing, the timelines are collapsing. And about every 45 minutes, I would come back and I'd look at someone and go, how long have I been gone for? Now, I do remember doing that once or twice. I remember being back long enough to roll a cigarette and gone before I could smoke it. But one thing I do remember is the visuals that I was bringing back with me. And it started with seeing myself in different timelines, different places in that moment. At home, having Christmas with my kids. In another area of the States with a different family. These timelines, it was like I was standing in a tunnel and this light would come from behind me and whoosh really fast past me and close out in front of me. They just kept coming faster and faster and faster and faster and faster. And I had no idea what these timelines were. I wasn't connected to them, I don't feel. They weren't ones that I was in. But it was pretty much all day. Timelines collapsing. And it was a very profound experience that left me in a very profound state. I'd had a really, really sore back leading up to that, lower back, which I do believe was actually the lead up to it. It was more of me slowly coming in and anchoring in my body so that I could have that experience. But afterwards, I was in such a heightened state of unconditional love for 3 months, I believe. I was glowing. I was so totally in my heart and in unconditional love. And I came down with a real thud about 3 months later. I know some of you have had the Kundalini experience, which has done the same thing. Actually, I skipped that. I did have one of those too in 2013. And that left me in the same state, just not as intense and not for as long. The next significant thing would be in 2014, I believe. A woman called Yellow Rose for Texas put out a video called The Lies NASA Told. And if you haven't seen it, highly recommend. And it blew everything open in terms of the nature of where we are, the nature of our reality. If you ever thought that the Matrix movie was a documentary, this was confirmation. And then the next significant piece would be an interview I did with John Lamlash that actually turned into a 2-part interview because he gave, in his own words, the best and most complete telling of the Sapphire myth that he'd ever given. And it changed a lot. In 2015, I interviewed a man called Mark Sargent on the Flat Earth theory. And I called it the mother of all conspiracies. But this concept, again, it wasn't to be taken at face value. It was a piece to be expanded upon. If anyone's stuck in the conversation of if it's a globe or if it's flat, it's so irrelevant. But it's a great stepping stone to being able to see things you couldn't before, to expanding your consciousness, to questioning assumptions. And all of that, all of those experiences, all of those knowings from childhood on led me to a moment in 2016 That's still hard to believe. And again, the lead up to it. So I believe it was October 12, 2016, that contact was made. But in the weeks leading up to that, I had my heart broken. And as is often the case, at least with me, heartbreak leads to heart expansion. After that initial 2013 experience, Christmas Day, and coming back down with a thud, I sort of felt like my intuitive, energetic abilities were almost gone to sleep. But in this heartbreaking, heart-expanding experience, I switched back on. I got my mojo back. I was back to seeing, feeling, knowing. The day of contact itself was such an energetic day. I couldn't function, actually. I couldn't do any work. I was just sitting on my couch doing the best I could do to move the energy that was running through me and pumping it out, sending it everywhere. It was just so much love. And then that night, got into bed with my computer with the plan to watch something on YouTube. And very quickly, my mouse just started moving around on the screen by itself. And considering the things I'd been involved in the years leading up to this, having spoken to some whistleblowers, things like that, I thought, my computer's hacked. That's it. And I slammed it shut, put it on the floor. And my husband said, well, maybe it is someone trying to communicate with you. Maybe you have been hacked. Let's see what they've got to say. So I opened it again, and sure enough, the mouse just continued. And then it pulled up the on-screen keyboard and said, hello, Lisa. And then sort of acted like a pendulum for a while. We were able to have a conversation with me asking yes/no questions, and it would up and down for yes and across for no. And then clicking on different random, well, they weren't random, they were very deliberate YouTube videos, typing in certain sentences in the menu bar. And that conversation went for a couple of hours. And it was quite extraordinary. Opening up Google Earth, opening up Google Sky, and trying to explain where we are. And I saw some things with Google Earth that I've never seen before. And how from an extraordinary height, with no tweaking, no refining, no correcting, hitting a spot and just going straight down and actually revealing different layers, going through the water to find another layer of earth, only to find another layer of water. It was all blowing my mind. In episode 2, it'll be all about this contact, who I spoke to and what they showed. And the next point in the collective awakening is obviously 2020 and beyond. And I will be sharing with you over the next couple of episodes the significance of all of this as I understand it, as I know it to be. And we've got a lot of people who are now aware. Well, not awake, but aware. So what's the difference? Aware for me is understanding how this world works in a very 3D way. Who's in charge, how things are orchestrated, understanding that nothing is as it seems, and nothing is what we've been told, what banking's all about, licenses, all of that. What wars are really all about. And that is making a lot of people angry. And I understand that one because I've been there. Awake is remembering who you are, remembering where you are, remembering who you've been, remembering that this is not it, remembering that you do have a home and this isn't it, realizing fully knowing that we are a collective of humanity that have been unconscious in a coma for a very, very long time. And it's just time to wake up. Thank you for listening. I hope you have connected with some of the points in time that I mentioned, or the experiences that I've talked about. perhaps to connect some dots in your own journey, to see how all of these events has led you to right here, right now, prepared to play your role and do your part in what's next. In episode 2, I am going to go into detail about the contact that I had with Lilu, my experiences with them, and I say them because there were many that she introduced me to, and what constitutes evidence for me that it was real. So I hope you'll join me then. Bye for now.